All right, so let's choose the SQL database option. Now, I alluded to it in the last video, but there's two concepts here. There's the database server and the database itself. Just like in Cosmos DB has an account and a database as well. So let's call this database AZSJD new DB. Okay, this is the database name within our Azure account. I'm going to put this on my usual subscription. I only have the one. Again, this is going to be different for you if you have the free plan or the MSDN or your corporate plan. We do have to put this into a resource group. I'm going to put this into SQL DB resource group. Now, we do have the option of starting with some data in it. So AdventureWorks has been a long time sample database in a lot of Microsoft projects over the years. So we do have the AdventureWorks LT database available if we want some sample data. We can also point to a backup file. So if you've got a backpack file that's been backed up from your database, let's say at your SQL server in your local environment, you want to back that up into a backpack file, there is the option for you to restore that database into an Azure SQL database right within this setup. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do this during the setup. I would start as a blank database and then create that import after. But we do have those three options when we're creating it. Now for the server. So this was the database, but database has to live in a server. I don't have any SQL servers, Azure SQL databases that are ready to go, so we're going to create a new one. Now this one has to be fully qualified. So this server, I can call it the same name even, AZSJD new DB, because it's .database.windows.net. So this is by default publicly accessible database that if you have the URL and the right access credentials, you can, and it's opened, you can connect to it. SQL Server in SQL Database uses a firewall method in here. We're going to get into that later, but basically you're going to have to whitelist people who are going to be able to get access to this. But if they're in the whitelist, then they're going to access it using this URL. So just like with a virtual machine, you're going to have to give an administrative username and password, and pick a physical location, a region around the world where we want this database to live. Now remember, I said that this runs on a firewall metaphor, and so there's a checkbox here that says, do we want to allow Azure services access to the server, which is basically opening a hole through the server firewall to allow other Azure services through by default. Okay, so we can turn that on unless you have a really busy account and you want to protect this particular database from other people. Okay, I'm going to say select. So we have our blank database AZSJD new DB. It's going to be on the brand new server. Now, this concept of an elastic pool, this is when you have, maybe you want to have multiple databases that are sharing resources. So databases can be a little bit expensive, and if you're going to have, like, let's say your company has 20 databases, well, you can set them up as 20 single databases, and they all have their own individual resource allocations. Those are single databases. But if you put them into an elastic pool, you can basically reserve a set amount of resources that all 20 databases end up sharing. Now you can save some money with this, assuming that those individual databases are not all maxed out using maximum resources at the same time. So if you've got one database that experiences a surge, but the other databases are quiet, this is a way of having the resources shared between it, just like a pool suggests. Because this is a standalone database, I'm going to say not now. This is not economical for a single database, only when you have multiples. Pricing. So just like a virtual machine, we're going to be given options in terms of pricing. Azure has a basic, standard, and premium. in terms of this type of pricing model, which is by performance. We're going to talk about purchasing the resources in a second, but there's two ways of basically purchasing SQL databases. One is by performance. So this basic environment is 5 DTUs, which is a database transaction units. And just like with web apps, using DTUs is going to be basically a way of comparing the performance. So if we've got 5 here on basic, if you get a 10 on standard, that's a double, you would expect double server performance, okay? So it's just a relative metric between different accounts. If you need 500 on the premium plan, that should be 100 times more powerful than the basic, and you would see that the pricing, $2,600 compared to $7, is also pretty fantastical as well. Now, premium has additional features beyond standard, but if you're looking at the DTUs, you're basically paying for performance. Now, that's one way of purchasing servers. The other way is what's called a vCore, which is by purchasing the core of the CPUs. How many CPUs you want? Do you want 2 cores, 4 cores? How much data do you need? 4 cores with 168 gigabytes and 50 gigabytes for logs has a price. So instead of purchasing, Microsoft giving you a performance guarantee or a performance promise, you are not getting that. You're getting a dedicated set of CPU, 4 virtual cores of a CPU, or an 8 virtual core CPU, how much data, and there's a price associated with that. You can also choose between generations, so generation 4 and generation 5. You would expect generation 5 is more performant. It also supports up to 80 cores, so if you've got a database that really needs 80 cores of CPU, you are looking at $21,000 a month. Okay, the price is per core. You can see it's the same price for generation 4 and generation 5. So there, you can actually purchase your database based on CPU and data, or just basically say, you know what, I just need a basic database and I'm willing to pay for the performance. I don't care how many cores, I don't care how big a memory store, as long as you can deliver me this performance. So I'm going to buy the five DTUs. It's the cheapest. There you go, $7 Canadian a month. It's about $5 US a month. I'm going to say apply. You only get the choice of this collation. I think if you are using different types of collation, then I would suggest looking at SQL Server. Look into. I mean, hopefully the default collation is good for most situations. So you see there's some complexity there, setting up databases and setting up servers. I'm going to hit the create button here. We'll get into it, but I'm going to pause the video. When we come back, we're going to have a working SQL database and we can start playing with it.